Toxic churches, they're not as rare as some people might think. A few are obvious because they have a reputation in the community for hurting people. Others are recognized as toxic only after a person gets involved and sees how the system really works and how people are really treated. But there are others that function smoothly and treat their people well, but still are toxic. Hi, this is Dr. Michael Bogart with Aspect Ministries. I've been doing a video series on toxic churches, how and why some churches become toxic. In other words, how people get hurt and how Jesus is poorly represented to their communities. So before I continue, I want to be very clear that not all churches are toxic. Far from it. As a Christian leader most of my adult life, I have been a close observer of churches and Christian organizations. Of course, it goes without saying that all churches have problems and conflicts at one level or another. The reason is because churches are made up of flawed and sometimes deeply broken individuals who are attempting to serve and represent Jesus to the best of their ability. Jesus alone is perfect, his people are not. But there are those churches that go beyond the normal relational and organizational dysfunctions to become toxic. In previous videos, we've looked at oppressive leadership, dysfunctional body life, imbalanced program, and legalistic attitudes as causes for toxicity. In this video, I want to look more closely at another factor, which is inward focus. So how do churches become inwardly focused? How do they adopt this attitude that has been described as we for and no more? Well, I have seen several ways that this can occur. Several ways that cause church people to say in one way or another that we don't need more people in our church. We're fine just the way we are. Well, first is the fear that Christian standards and godly living might be compromised if more people show up. I remember a lady who volunteered in a certain youth program that our church ran when I was a full-time pastor. She showed up every week along with her children. She worked hard at making the program first class and run smoothly. Her children excelled in the program because they loved it. One afternoon we were setting up for the program that would be happening later that evening. I happened to be with her for a few minutes in that room that she was working in. And since she had me alone, she decided to bring up something that was bothering her. She said, "Pastor, something has been on my mind. There are those kids from the trailer park across town that some of our members have been bringing to the program. I've noticed that some of them have foul mouths, and it doesn't look like they've bathed recently. They don't come prepared with their lessons, and I think they're just here for the fun and games and refreshments. I think we're wasting our time with these kids. Please ask those people to stop bringing the kids from the trailer park." Well, needless to say, I was shocked. I replied, "Those kids are the reason we have this program. Your kids do very well. They carry off most of the awards, but they already have a fine Christian environment. They have a fine woman in yourself raising them. They already have Sunday school on Sunday mornings. They don't really need this midweek program. Now, we're glad to have your kids here, and we hope that you'll continue to volunteer and that your children will continue to come and enjoy it. But the reason we have the program is for kids like those kids from the trailer park. This is all they have. They're not going to come to Sunday school, at least not right now. Maybe they don't have Christian families. So this is what they're going to get." She came back with, "But they have such filthy mouths sometimes, and it's such a bad influence on my children." I said, "I know. We're asking them to watch their language, but we're not going to ask them to stay away." Well, she wasn't very happy with my answer, but about a week later, I saw her again, and she took me aside and said, "You know, Pastor, I've been thinking about our conversation, been thinking about what you said, and you're absolutely right." She said, "I got to thinking about my own childhood. I had a very difficult upbringing, but Jesus got a hold of me and transformed me. And I've worked hard to establish a Christian family with my husband. But I realized that once upon a time, I was one of those trailer park kids. And maybe that's why it bothers me so much, because it reminds me of my difficult past. But you're right. Those are the kids that we need to reach." Now, one of the reasons why churches can become toxic is when they decide that they don't want to admit certain people because it will ruin their nice Christian environment. This woman's not the only one who is troubled by outsiders coming into the church. There were a number of times in churches that I was involved in which people indicated that they didn't like it when certain people visited church on a Sunday. They didn't come dressed properly, or they used words that we found offensive, etc. One of the churches I ministered in was located in a community that had a large military installation nearby. Military families would come to our church on a fairly regular basis. And they could be kind of rough sometimes. This bothered some of the people because, well, there were cigarette butts in the parking lot, language that was inappropriate, and they didn't talk about the Christian things that many of our people were more comfortable with. Some felt that they were a bad influence on the congregation. So as a pastor committed to nurturing Christians, but also to reaching people in the community, I struggled with finding the balance. Yes, we needed to maintain certain basic standards of behavior in Christian relationships. At the same time, we are mandated by Jesus to reach people who need to be part of God's family. And finding that balance is never easy. Churches come to different conclusions on how that works. But find the solution we must. Another reason why churches can become inwardly focused is that we don't want to compromise the cool thing that we have going. Maybe it's the close relationships or the long-standing friendships. We don't want to upset those comforting and wonderful relationships that we've built over the years by adding new people to the mix. One life-changing lesson that I learned at a Christian conference was from a speaker who talked about how our lives are like Legos. Yes, Legos. Legos only have a certain number of little knobs that can plug into other Legos. Some have 8 little knobs, some have only 1 or 2 little knobs. But once those knobs are connected, there's no more room to connect to anything else. The speaker went on to say that relationships in the church are like that. Once you have an established group of friends and other relationships, all of your knobs are connected and you don't have the time or the resources to reach out to new people or establish friendships with new people. If you do establish new friendships, that means that other relationships have to be disconnected or downgraded because you don't have unlimited time and energy. And sometimes churches don't want new people because, well, frankly, they're satisfied with the connections they already have. There's a third reason why churches can become inwardly focused. They're concerned about scarce resources. I remember wanting to start a college outreach. In one of the churches that I served in, I taught part-time at a local community college. And during those years, some of my students responded to me. They knew that I was a pastor. I didn't make a big deal out of it in class, but they knew who I was and they were intrigued. And a few each semester visited our church. So I thought, well, let's start a college ministry. There's nothing like that on the campus. The reaction I got from some of the leaders was that we couldn't afford to do it because we were already stretched too thin. So, long story short, I couldn't get the resources approved to make anything meaningful happen. Now, I'm not saying that every new idea needs to be funded and resourced, but when it's a choice between maintaining the people that we have or reaching out, it seems to me like some faith is required on the part of people who claim that they live by faith. Just as a side note, I recently preached in that church after more than 20 years of not being there. And it was interesting that most of the people had come or gone in one way or another. There were a few people that we still recognized after all that time, but 4 people came up to me during that brief time on a Sunday morning and they said, "You remember me? You taught me at the college." So I met 4 of my students who were at that church. They didn't come when I was there, but they knew me and they had come because of my time in the college classroom there. And so my idea of starting a college ministry actually turns out to have been a pretty good idea. A final reason why churches can become inward focused is something that I will deal with more fully in my last video in this series. But I do want to at least mention it here. There is this feeling in some churches that the world is changing at a very fast and scary pace. The church is the one place in people's lives where they can come and relax and enjoy things that they've known all of their lives without a lot of change. Let's not change the music. Let's not change the format. Let's not change our seating arrangements. Let's not change the decor in the church. Let's not change the style of preaching. Why? Because it's always been that way, and in a confusing and ever-changing world, at least we can come to church and plug into something relatively timeless. I get that. We need places of sanctuary where life is not chaotic and confusing. Church can certainly be one of those places. And I'm not saying that we necessarily need to change music or decor or anything else. But when change is necessary in order to incorporate new people, it seems to me that some sacrifice is required of God's people. Again, there can be all sorts of compromises made. You don't have to completely get rid of the old music. Maybe you can incorporate some new songs along with the old in terms of music or decor for that matter. And there are ways to please and accommodate the needs and comfort levels of the existing body of Christ, as well as reaching out to new people. It's not one or the other necessarily. And a lot of younger pastors these days seem to think either you reach new people or you please the existing people, and there's no compromise there. And I don't agree with that at all. But the desire to maintain things the way they've always been is another reason why churches can become inwardly focused. All right, I've got a couple more videos to do in this Toxic Church series. And in these following videos, we're going to talk about cultural disconnect and trendy message. This is Dr. Michael Bogart with Aspect Ministries. We'll see you then.